Hey there! Hi, buddy. Today is a historic day for Clutchcast. I'm here with my good friend Roadster, who is about to embark on a very important journey of self-discovery. And that involves going on a dyno. That's right, today we are taking the Roadster on a chassis dyno for the first time. What is a dyno? It's short for dynamometer. How am I going to explain this?
A simple generator of EMF can also be made by rotating a single turn coil within a stationary magnetic field of two magnets with opposite polarity.
Magnets, how do they work?
Basically, we are driving this car onto a ramp, and on that ramp there are wheels. So the wheels of the car engage with the wheels of the dyno, and those wheels actually generate electrical current. And that is measured by a computer, and it's turned into a power figure. So the whole point of this is that we want to know the power output of this car before I start putting any kind of go-fast goodies on it, like headers or exhausts or intake or anything like that. I mean, the goal of this particular car is not so much, horsepower, but it's interesting to note what kind of changes go on when you put these little things in your car and see how they can, add up over time. So it is useful to get a benchmark to see, where you're at and where you've gone in terms of power. In that sense, the dyno is pretty useful. It's probably a good idea to start out with some specs on this car and kind of estimate where I think it's going to end up on the dyno to begin with. So checking my notes here, it's a 2000 BMW Z3 Roadster 2.3 is what the badge says on the back. Usually BMW puts those numeric badges on the back to kind of indicate what kind of motor it has or what kind of features it has, basically how expensive it is. Usually they align pretty well with the engine size, so you would think that maybe something that had a 2.3 badge on the back of the car had a 2.3 liter at the front of the car, but that's not the case with this one. It's actually got a 2.5 liter inline six motor. It's called the M52 TUB25. And numbers can get kind of finicky when they come from the factory, but this is what it was advertised as having from the factory. It was advertised as having 170 horsepowers generated at 5,500 RPM. Now obviously that's probably going to decrease for a lot of reasons. One is that is just the engine rating itself. It doesn't account for the power that is sapped by the transmission. This one is a manual transmission. It doesn't account for the power sapped by the differential. A lot of things going into this that, that you would expect to take down from that horsepower rating. So I'm going to try to account for some of those things that may take away some horsepower from that rating. First of all, the motor is 122,000 miles young. As I have not noticed any real oil consumption, which is great for an 18-year-old car at that mileage. It consumes probably less than a quart between every 3,000 mile oil change, which I do about every year, maybe a little less than a year. But anyway, last time I did the oil change was less than 500 miles ago. That was actually the first oil change I did on this car. It was the first oil change I had since I came to own this car. And I changed that oil out to 0W40 Mobil 1 synthetic, which is European formula oil. So the oil's pretty good. The oil's pretty young. I did check the oil that came out of the car, the old oil, with a laboratory to kind of give me some indication about the wear of the motor, maybe how it was treated by its previous owner. I have the results right here. Basically, what Blackstone Labs sent me. They said the wear metals looked pretty good, meaning that the wear of the internals of that motor seemed to be favorable when you look at the amount of metal that ended up in the oil. But they also note that the lead, which they noticed from the bearings, was high. That tells me that there is some wear in this motor, so that probably will take some horsepower away from that 170 horsepower rating. Other things of note are that the transmission fluid in this car is probably original, as far as I can tell. The differential fluid, however, I changed out when I refurbed the rear end of the car, also less than 500 miles ago, and I changed that out with 75 W90 Mobil 1 synthetic gear oil. So the differential hopefully is in better condition than when I found it, and therefore will maybe sap less horsepower. Also of important note, the gas in the engine. BMW recommends 91 octane for this car, but I've located 93 octane 100% gasoline. That means no ethanol for this car, and that's what's in the tank right now. That's what I like to run with. It's still yet unknown whether that's actually an improvement from the 91 recommended by BMW. There's a possibility that running a slightly higher octane when the car is not programmed for it and does not adjust timing for it actually takes away horsepower. So that's kind of an unknown quantity, but I just use the 93 100% gasoline because, well, I think it's high quality, and, you know, maybe there is a benefit to it, but I don't think it can hurt too much, and maybe it can help, so that's why it's in the tank. So all things considered, you know, the age of the motor, the age of the motor oil, the type of the motor oil, the type of the gas that's in the tank, I'm estimating that this car will come in 20% below what it was spec'd at from the factory. I'm estimating here that when I put this on the dyno, it will measure 136 horsepower at 5,500 RPM. That's my best guess. There's also a lot of other factors that come into this horsepower number. I mean, when you go to different speed shops with different dynos, those dynamometers may be tuned differently. They may have different calibration. They may have different configuration. There's a chance that a reading that you get at one is not going to be the same that you get at another, and may not even represent the true power that your car is outputting. So, I mean, it could go either way, but I'm thinking 136 horsepower from this 18-year-old BMW Z3 with a straight 6. I'm going to Abel Racing in Midwest City. This was actually a garage that was featured on a show called Garage Rehab, and it looks pretty swank, you know, for a place where you know, wrench on cars. So I'm kind of excited to go there in the first place, and also just to know what this car does stock. So I'm gonna hit the road. It's gonna be a great time. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it weighs about 4,200. Actually, we're working on it right now. Hopefully, we can cover the
Before I get into the results, I want to talk about the experience of actually going to a speed shop with a dyno, or what it should be. Because this place was pretty cool. You will see a lot of really neat cars. I saw a really cool M5, a SVT truck, which was neat. But you set your appointment just like you know, any other place, and you show up with your car. They drive it to the dyno. They put it on the dyno, And usually they do a couple of runs. Depending on the speed shop and the dyno machine that they have, they may set it up a couple different ways. My particular setup involved a sensor at the tailpipe, which was in effect to measure the air-fuel ratio of the exhaust gases. My dyno run did not include anything like an OBD2 connection, so it didn't get an RPM reading, but it did get a miles per hour reading to correspond with the power output on the dyno graph. If the shop has a relatively new DynoJet dynamometer, they can print off a sheet, which I have here, or they can also send you a file with all of the logged information from your dyno run. This is a file that ends in an extension WP8. The cool thing is you can go to dynojet.com, download free software from them that allows you to explore every parameter. Whatever data they gather during that test, you have that in a file on your computer now. You can use that to print out more sheets. You can save either a PNG file or a JPEG graphics file and share that as well. You can also export a CSV file or an Excel spreadsheet, which allows you to take that into any kind of spreadsheet program and do really interesting graphing things. So that was pretty cool. I wasn't expecting that. Most of what I've seen in forums is just, pieces of paper being passed around, which makes it hard to actually look at the data from one run to another. Most people don't have a lot of options in their area, but if you can find a dyno shop with a relatively new dyno, when you call to try to make an appointment, ask them what they have and ask them if they can save that file and email it to you or put it on a flash drive. Really it's up to you, but be inquisitive, ask around. Another thing is there's going to be a lot of different cars that they bring in on this dyno on a daily basis, so you might have to wait for someone to finish their run. Someone's probably going to do a run right after you because, this shop's got to make money. But I bring this up because you shouldn't be, embarrassed or, worried about the car that you bring to put on the dyno. Believe me, they've seen everything. They've seen 1,000 horsepower beasts, and they've seen, vehicles that do less than 100 horsepower. And, to be honest, if it's a good shop with good customer service like I experienced, they don't judge you on the car that you bring in there, so that's pretty cool. So just looking at my notes here again, I estimated that this car at the wheels would produce 136 horsepower. This car actually did a lot better than what I thought it would. So here's my dyno graph, right? I'm going to find a way to put a better image up there. But 148.91 horsepower at 73.18 miles per hour. Something I should explain about this graph besides the peak horsepower is that at the bottom of the graph, this is measured in miles per hour. This car was put on the dyno in third gear, so this is a third gear pull. There were two pulls, and this is actually the better of the two pulls. It's the second of the two pulls. Now, typically, if the car is hooked up to an OBD2 connector to the dyno, you will have on the bottom typically RPM instead. But miles per hour is fine. What we're looking at is peak horsepower, and we're also looking at what happens to the curve along the progression of engine speed or the speed of the dyno. So on this graph, from about 45 miles per hour all the way up to 85 miles per hour, there is a dip somewhere between 72 miles per hour and all the way up to about 77 or 78 miles per hour. And one of the reasons why that dip exists in the first place is because the DISA system shuts off. And you can actually reprogram the car to have that open longer, and that will actually give you about 10 extra horsepower across that range. But otherwise, a pretty healthy graph and pretty standard from what I see from other comparable cars. Of course, this is just a single test, right? The purpose of doing these dyno runs is that you can compare the output of the car as you make changes to the car or as the car ages, and you test this over time. I'm not just excited about this run because this run I learned a lot this run. Okay, I'd never been to a dyno shop before. It was a very positive experience. But one last thing I want to emphasize before I leave you is that the journey for this car, and I hope for a journey for a lot of you at home, is not just about chasing these horsepower numbers. You can spend a lot of money and go through a lot of heartache trying to get that little squiggle to move up and get the next number. You know, for some that might be a very rewarding experience, but just keep in mind that, you know, the car owning experience and the car driving experience is more than just, you know, a number on a chart. It's about how the car makes you feel when you drive it. Ultimately, in the end, if the car doesn't make you happy when you drive it, you know, what do you have it for? This is not going to be an obsession with, you know, dyno numbers. This is not a contest. This is an experiment, you know. If the exhaust only gets me 2 horsepower, well, that's what it gets me, and just enjoy it for what it is. So that's it for now. Thank you for joining me on this, you know, pretty important Clutch cast. I hope you're able to find a, you know, a reliable, customer-friendly dyno shop in your area and have a great experience as well. If you have a dyno experience already, if you've taken your car to a dynamometer or another speed shop, you know, share that in the comments. I'm sure other people would like to read about your experiences, things that went well, maybe things that didn't go well. So that's it for this Clutch cast. I hope you have a great time driving. See you later.